Okay, so welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we have an exclusive interview with Clif High. Finally, after a long time of mailing, he's finally received the messages and replied. So we're very honored to have him come onto the show and share some of his vast experiences and wealth of knowledge with us today. And he is obviously from halfpasthuman.com. And that is obviously the home of the Auto Report, as all my subscribers are more than aware. So I'd like to go straight into some questions with you, Clif, if we may.
That'd be quite fine. We can jump right in.
On this channel, Clif, you allow me the summary of the Auto Reports to be read out every single month, so my listeners are more than aware of who you are and up to speed with what it is that you do. I'd like to dive right into your personal woo-woo universe, as we have many questions today, not only from me, but from the growing community of subscribers who wish to focus on some more even deeper topics and on woo-woo subjects that you don't have time to expand on in other interviews. So we'll get straight in with the first question. We'll start with an easy one. Behind the scenes of creating the Webbot Auto Reports, what is it we don't hear about? Do you sometimes see things that are controversial or unbelievable that you don't put into the Webbot reports?
Yes, there's quite a bit of stuff that I will deliberately leave out. Some because I don't have a solid understanding that the prescience is valid. Okay, so um, I have to deliberately screen certain memes that come through because I think that they may be manipulation or an attempt to skew data, not necessarily aimed at myself, but aimed at some other effect. And so I throw things out quite frequently. And they do turn out to be prescient, but also I've learned enough now that they also turn out to be part of someone's game. An example, what might be someone that would be manipulating the Twitter feed in order to cause the algorithms that are operating the computers on Wall Street to trade certain ways. And the way that they manipulate that Twitter feed could throw because they're attempting to cause something to actually occur in the future, it has a tendency to force a particular kind of processing it within my stuff, and so it can throw a hitch in the get along. So I don't report things like that. And there are numerous attempts. So from my viewpoint, one of the things my spiders are doing is attempting to collect data in what can only really be described as a giant digital battlefield with many different parties at war, or not even at war, but attempting to manipulate the environment to their own end in conflict with someone else. And so it's a very difficult task, really, and has grown so from the 90s. In the 90s, that did not exist. It was a nice, pleasant, pastoral area where I could go on out and pick up the buttercups of prescient language. These days, we have to, watch out for logic bombs and DDoS attacks and you name it, hacks, and these other guys cracks, and it just gets really annoying. So I never go into that. And as a consequence, though, because of that development, I'm actually unsure as to how much we're not seeing anymore within our data sets because the view is being obscured by the smoke of everybody else's battle. So there's that aspect of it. Yes, I also do have a lot of stuff that is just like really space goat fart level bizarre that I have to wait for it to mature. The space goat fart stuff comes in more frequently in longer term data than other sets or than other entity areas. So, for instance, a sudden shift in the mindset of a population might appear within the short term data and not the long term. In other words, it's going to show up here and we only get like 4 months warning as opposed to a year and a half. Simply because the change of mind was reasonably quick or something. And so that kind of thing occurs. But with the Space Goat Farts entity, it rarely ever happens that anything just pops into view. It matures over a long period of time. And so I get a lot of really strange stuff in there. A lot of it's still pending or percolating to see if it's actually going to drop into short term and be worth talking about. Much of it is really strange. Like an example might be beings of some form engineering giant energy device around a planet and deciding at some point for whatever reason, to stop that engineering and go on to some other task. And they left all their tools and everything there. And we call that planet Saturn. And the energy device, we call it the rings. So there's that kind of stuff showing up, right? And I'm just waiting for it to mature enough in here to see if any of the specifics start showing up in a meaningful fashion. A lot of this has to be sorted out, especially in that area, in the real deep woo-woo, from all the disinfo. So one thing I do know is that I can say quite confidently that the flat earth meme that we've seen so prevalent these last few years, I actually was able to, purely by chance, catch its origination out of the E-ring, out of Department of Defense here in the Pentagon. The E-ring is a particular shape, but it's basically concentric circles, and so everything is a ring going inwards. And there's the disinfo area, which is in the E-ring. And they're the ones that brought out the flat Earth meme, or anything I would say would be speculation. So yeah, there's quite a bit that I don't include because at this point it's either not mature enough. I don't have enough background hooks to other entities to see how it's going to impact us, or it's so far out that it's not yet in a position where there's enough details to validate it, if that makes any sense at all. Sure. So for a lot of stuff on the Ice Age was way out in the year 2000, and so didn't really get around to discussing it until, little allusions to it in the 2003, 4, 5, and 6 range in terms of the reports. And it's taken a long time for that to get this robust within the data.
It's fantastic that you can actually pinpoint the origin of, like you've just stated, the flat earth meme, because one thing that obviously occurs is you have a truth movement which is trying to educate itself, but can quite easily be led down a wrong path. And because the manipulation and what appears to be evidence, which can sometimes seem fairly logical when you're trying to seek that truth, it can disjoint the entire truth-seeking community into a division of effectively confrontation between both sides, which is obviously all designed to create that confrontation. Is that correct?
That'd be quite correct, and that would be, I think, an accurate speculation as to one of the effects that was desired from that meme. And what I'm going to say next is going to be a little bit perhaps shocking, and then I say more power to them. Okay, more power to the E-ring. Let them bring it on. Let them dump this stuff out there. Bring that disinfo out as fast as they can. And here's my thinking on this. I live in the progressive liberal-dominated Western social order that's been in existence all of my life and has been maturing that way. Now, there's a component to this that's very negative. And that is that our education system is not that. It is a school system. And in schooling, you get out, you survive it by regurgitating the thoughts that they want you to regurgitate in the way that they want to hear it. And if you don't, then you're substandard and you suffer the consequences. And that's the way our structure is made. So the school system is not designed to teach people to think. I'm of the opinion at the moment that we are entering into an education period in this period of contention, and that what's going to happen is that the things such as the flat Earth meme are just brilliant, just staggeringly illuminating the entire battlefield like some kind of giant flare up there. And it is going to be so good for us because we will have that contention and we will learn and teach ourselves to think better as a result of it. Wow. Of arguing this out, that's when you learn. I mean, you don't learn just by reading something and accepting it and saying, okay, that's the way it is. You learn by having those ideas tested, beaten back, beaten down, and then you come back with the counter thrust to it and you get back out there and push it up. If it's a valid idea, then in the end you win. If not, then at some point you decide, oh, okay, that's where I'm wrong. And then that's when you really win, because your ability to learn is suddenly thrust upon you, and your ability to reason and think critically is suddenly thrust upon you. And then at some point you will recognize that and you will say, aha, thank you, my enemies, that you were so great that I have learned so well.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Cliff, so I'm going to move over to a slightly different topic here, which it may have the effect of depressing people, but it's a very important topic which has to be discussed, and hopefully you can shed some light on this for us. So, arguably, the biggest... We're going to move on to a new topic here, if that's okay, Cliff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you believe NASA has landed a man on the moon?
Sure. Yeah, I actually do. I don't think they got there with the rockets, no.
That leads us on to the next question. What are your thoughts regarding the hollow moon hypothesis? Do you think the moon is sending out controlling beams to Earth?
The moon is certainly hollow. Absolutely no question. Probably hollow all the way through. It's older than Earth. It was here before Earth. It was brought in and parked at a very particular point in Earth to deny us a view of the backside of it. It was parked in such a position to cause the exact effect that we get with eclipses. In other words, if you move the moon, arguably, if you move the moon at some points as little as 50,000 miles out or in from its current position, you wouldn't get a lunar eclipse, and we wouldn't have the solar eclipses the way we do. So that right there tells you that there was a deliberate attempt to create an energy fluctuation at a certain period and within for some specific reason when the moon was parked here. Because there's let me stop and say, the moon is parked in such a way as to cause the eclipses by being placed at this point of the nodes, they call it, I think, in astrology. But if you moved it back 100,000 miles, 200,000 miles, we wouldn't have these, and the moon would actually suffer less from the impacts of the counter forces from Earth on it gravitationally. So in other words, the moon at the moment, even it's hollow and it's constructed and it groans a lot. I'm sure it squeaks like an old Model T going down the road because of the pull of Earth on it as we go through our relationship. And they put the moon in such a place that the center of the gravitational attraction for the moon is not the surface of the Earth. It's in about 600 miles. And so this peri-lunar epicenter for gravity being inside the Earth certainly contributes to energetic problems within the Earth itself and is certainly affecting the earthquakes. Since the moon was deliberately parked there, you must make the assumption that this was also a calculated component of what they were after when they parked it there. I keep going back to this because it was so difficult for them to find just that spot that created all of these kind of effects. So at that level, we know that they are someone attempted to cause energetic effects on Earth, and they may have intended those energetic effects to affect humans. So if someone's thinking in terms of, the moon beaming down radiation on us now to cause us to think certain ways, that is indeed happening because it alters your thinking every time there's a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse. It alters the thinking of everybody on the planet every 28 days as women go through their cycles. And it also affects men on a 29.45 day cycle. There's a corresponding hormonal surge in men that is lagging. So all of this was designed as a part of the placement of the moon, in my opinion.
So what is it that this hormone change in men actually does?
It causes the ratio of the free testosterone to bound testosterone to change on a nearly 30-day cycle. And the nearly 30-day cycle, the military here in the U.S. found to be kind of interesting because they were going to use it to see where the troops were weakest relative to the bound testosterone and so on. But I read a very fascinating, and I don't think that ever went anywhere, but I read a very fascinating study that suggests that you could do things like the Taoists and the yogis have discovered. You could time the ingestion of all kinds of things into your system to take advantage of the surges that are basically going on. So you have as a male, you have this almost 4-day cycle. It's like 3.9 something days. And in that cycle, the ratio of the bound testosterone and free testosterone in the system shifts, and you'll get a hormonal surge. You might feel this surge more acutely this month, so it's actually a good thing to talk about. In February, the February here, we have this thing called the Valentine's holiday. In other
Yeah.
cultures, it's a, there's various names for it, but it's a, let's just say it's an eros or a romantic or a physical kind of a affection sort of a holiday, right? It celebrates the pre-spring blooming, if you will. And it does so simply because there's a conjunction of influences here that allow energies to come in from space and that are, whether they're reflected off the planet Venus or we have just merely misidentified them with the planet Venus, is neither here nor there. But the result is such that we actually have memorialized it within our culture and have provided guidelines for this to go on. And so we know that these kind of energy effects are coming on in, and I suspect that the moon being placed where it's at is precisely done just to do that, and why they chose to put it there and tweak it just enough to provide that difference between the male and female hormonal cycles within a lunar month is anybody's guess, but it is noticeable. And so you might notice, for instance, that you get a better effect from let's just say grooming or hair rituals, that you'll have good hair days during these 4 days. And it's more than simply your personal impression of it. You have a different ratio of hormones. The testosterone is backing off as it's going into the being bound up, which frees blood flow to the hair follicles and make it glow better, that kind of thing, right? There's actually physical processes going on.
So, if I understand it, we basically get a drop in testosterone, which is, do we take on more of a feminine side during those few days? Hence the reason for increased emotion for relationships or something, bringing into Valentine's Day?
Correct.
Wow, that's
And
pretty...
that happens monthly, but in this particular month, there's this greater expression of it because of the broader conjunction of the planets, and this happens annually.
And globally, yes?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, amazing.
And it's it's understandable, but was it engineered? Might well have been, because I know the moon part was engineered.
Right, so do you think it's a base for off-world platforms or a breakaway civilization? Or do you think it's more like an artificial Death Star? Hence the movie Star Wars.
Yeah, I think the latter was probably the original case, that it was an artificial structure that some beings used to go walkabout in a galactic fashion, and that it's being parked here. We know that it's about twice as old as our planet. The dust on it is older than our planet and doesn't come from our solar system. So that's now. That having been said, are the people that put it there still around? I don't know. Certainly, if I know that there's a lot of chatter, so to speak, within the intelligence and the woo-woo communities that there's all kinds of bases up there from all kinds of beings. So I'm of the opinion that the original owners have vacated and it's a bunch of squatters.
Hence the dark side of the moon, which is also same reference in the movie.
Yes.
So you're basically saying it is a spaceship of a kind.
Sure. Yeah. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. Why go through the universe in red dwarf if you can just, fire up the Earth and move it the way you want?
Yeah, there was a lot of references actually regarding the moon and how NASA tested it by shooting Apollo at it, which created a massive ringing sound on impact.
Yeah, that just went on and on and on. Yeah.
And there's certain metals like uraniums which have been found which aren't a natural substance. So there's a lot of evidence actually backing up what it is that we're saying here. So it's definitely something people need to get to grips with, that the thing that we look at in the sky isn't as innocent as it actually really looks.
Correct. And it does, it causes all the tidal action. You can't deny that it's energetically affecting us. Yeah, what would we be without it? See, there's the rub, Guy. Was it designed to cause us? One could speculate that it's what keeps us fighting amongst ourselves instead of cooperating and pulling all together to going out and kick ass in the universe in general.
Yeah. So as you just stated, that there may be squatters on the moon. Some of those squatters might actually be forms of breakaway civilizations from Earth and also from other realms of the universe.
That, in my opinion, or that forms a certainty in in my worldview that such things have occurred. I've gotten so many weird personal contacts with this sort of thing. It's quite remarkable. When I was a child, like really, really young, we would go back to California. I had relatives that lived in the Jamestown area, and which is the frog jubilee area of California in the Sierra Nevadas. And I had contact through my uncle with this place called O'Neill's Gulch, which was the site of these airships that were there in the 1830s that were being flown around by a bunch of Germans. And so when I was a kid, I saw this big scar on this hill up about 250 feet from the bottom of the hill. He was actually out teaching my brother and myself to do some gold panning, and on a stream that ran through O'Neill's Gulch, and there up on the side of this cliff was this big scar, big indent, obviously something smashed into it. And when we asked, he said, no, it wasn't an airplane. It was from one of these flying ships that they had in the last century. And then he tells us about it, and we thought he was basically full of it, right? That just making it up on the spot. But indeed, it turns out that there was a hotbed of airship activity in the 1830s. And then later on in my life, I happened to go to Germany and be in a position to discover and peruse for well over a year all kinds of material that the Nazis had collected relative to UFO stuff done by this guy we used to call Herr Dr. Camel. And he's actually Kammer. He was probably the most powerful person in all of Nazi Germany because he ran a huge, giant empire on his own, and he was part of the Africa Corps. And so we called him Camel because all of the boxes we found, my brother and I, had the Africa Corps' symbol of the palm trees, and then some of them had the camel in the palm trees. And anyway, so I found all kinds of stuff that the Germans had gotten, and for the better part of a year I was reading into it. And it was like reading science fiction books, but it was their version, and it was all quite factual. And so I'm of the opinion that the Germans actually, before 1940, had achieved anti-gravity flight and had probably also achieved what we might think of as like warp drive, where you're traveling outside of time. They may not have been able to control the latter, but I know they did control the former, and so that means that they were out there flitting around in these spaceships that they were building. Now, bear in mind, too, that the Germans at the time didn't have the ability to do micro welding or any of this kind of stuff, so they had to build big. So some of the spaceships they were building were 70 meters across, 210 feet across. Yeah. Had enough room for 70 people. And if you look at the way they were constructed, they had over 32,000 square feet of interior space. That's the better part of an acre. So considerable. I actually want one of those. I want to convert it into a motorhome. But so they were serious about this. So yes, I'm of the opinion that the Germans left the Earth with non-rocket propulsion sometime probably before 41. And thus are likely to have said, oh, let's go up and see what's on the moon.
Yeah, and now they're squatting there.
Well, thousands, tens upon thousands of people disappeared during this. Okay, so let me back up. When I went into Europe, we went in the period of time when they were just cleaning up the last of what was known as the displaced persons wave, okay? And this was when tens of millions of people that had been shifted around, maybe even hundreds of millions that had been shifted around due to the war, being moved here and there and so on, all tried to sort themselves out. During that period of time, it is not possible at this point for us to estimate how much of the German population basically simply disappeared. Now, I actually had a personal experience of that in the very early 60s because we were, when we first got to Germany, even though there was concurrent travel at the time for military, that means you could travel with, the family could travel with the military officer. We didn't have any housing, and so we had to live on the economy, and so they rented us an apartment in Friedrichsburg, and we were up on the third floor of this really cool place, but down on the first floor was this guy that my brother and I irritated because we were just out doing kid stuff, and I'm going into the details, but we kind of irritated him. We had to go down and apologize for the mess we'd made on his patio, and he turned out to be this Waffen SS colonel, a real bastard, a real terrible Mean son of a bitch. He'd lost the lower half of one of his legs and was sitting around waiting basically for surgeries, a couple of them. And he spoke just impeccable English because he was had been an interrogator. This was a guy, I was like 8.5 years old. My brother was like 6 years old while we are cleaning up the mess we made. He's saying about, 13 years back, that in his job he would just had this done to us or that done to us or so on. He was a right royal bastard. And my brother got really tired of it at one point and said, well, watch out. Next time you walk out the door, maybe a ball bearing will fall straight out of our third floor window and kill you dead. And so anyway, from that point on, we got a lot of respect from him. But anyway, he was fascinating because he actually disappeared. While we were there living in that apartment, we were barely there 4 months or so. He'd had the surgery maybe 2 weeks after we first met him. He recovered for another couple of weeks. And then we saw him one day, and he was getting hammers and stuff from the super in the building and was nailing up crates and stuff. And then like maybe 3 or 4 days after that, a truck came along. He got in the truck. All those boxes were there, and he's just gone. And, at that point, it was like, all the time that we'd known him and he was talking and stuff, he was just basically saying how they didn't lose the war and that, we were just deluded and we just thought he was just sour grapes, right?
Yeah.
But from his viewpoint, maybe he was just waiting for his ticket out.
Yeah. There's a lot of fantastic channels out there that actually go into depth about the whole Nazi situation, which I do recommend people spend some time to find out what actually happened to the Nazis after the war. Because it wasn't just lost.
Germany lost the war. I don't believe the National Socialist Party did, no.
Right, so last question on that topic. Have you ever seen anything in your data about a war between Earth and the Moon, or some kind of conflict?
No. All of my data is forward-looking. So a lot of people ask me, can you go look for stuff in the past and things like that? It's like, no, it doesn't... it doesn't work that way. It's not like remote viewing. I mean, it's entirely designed to aggregate prescience. And so far, there's nothing in there saying that we're at war with the moon or any of that. I do get the conscious data that shows all of the movie scripts about those themes. And I can actually tell you sometimes ahead of time when the language of a particular movie, because it's been leaked out and people are just talking about it, my spiders bring it in and I put it in these bins that I throw away. But occasionally I look at them just to make sure I'm not throwing away good stuff, Yeah. Sort of a double check on myself. And I'll check those and I'll work some numbers on them because they're interesting. And I can tell you ahead of time when some movies are going to really resonate simply because, and thus theoretically would make a lot of money because they happen to have good timing and are harmonious with language that's going on anyway.
Okay, Cliff, so coming back to Earth now and,
Sure.
and expanding on that to a degree, we move over to this next set of questions. Okay, so welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we have an exclusive interview with Clif High. Finally, after a long time of mailing, he's finally received the messages and replied. So we're very honoured to have him come onto the show and share some of his vast experiences and wealth of knowledge with us today. And he is obviously from half past cumin.
Processing it within my stuff, and so it can throw a hitch in the get along. So I don't report things like that. And there are numerous attempts. So from my viewpoint, one of the things my spiders are doing is attempting to collect data in what can only really be described as a giant digital battlefield with many different parties at war, or not even at war, but attempting to manipulate the environment to their own end in conflict with someone else. And so it's a very difficult task, really, and has grown so from the 90s. In the 90s, that did not exist. It was a nice, pleasant, pastoral area where I could go on out and pick up the buttercups of prescient language. Themes that come through because I think that they may be manipulation or an attempt to skew data, not necessarily aimed at myself, but aimed at some other effect, and so I throw things out quite frequently, and they do turn out to be prescient, but also I've learned enough now that they also turn out to be part of someone's game. An example, what might be someone that would be manipulating the Twitter feed in order to cause the algorithms that are operating the computers on Wall Street to trade certain ways, and the way that they manipulate that Twitter feed could throw a because they're attempting to cause something to actually occur in the future, it has a tendency to force a particular kind of
.com, and that is obviously the home of the Auto Report, as all my subscribers are more than aware. So I'd like to go straight into some questions with you, Cliff, if we may.
That'd be quite fine. We can jump right in.
On this channel, Cliff, you allow me the summary of the Auto Reports to be read out every single month, so my listeners are more than aware of who you are and up to speed with what it is that you do. I'd like to dive right into your personal woo-woo universe, as we have many questions today, not only from me, but from the growing community of subscribers who wish to focus on some more even deeper topics and on woo-woo subjects that you don't have time to expand on in other interviews. So we'll get straight in with the first question. We'll start with an easy one. Behind the scenes of creating the Webbot Auto Reports, what is it we don't hear about? Do you sometimes see things that are controversial or unbelievable that you don't put into the Webbot reports?
Yes, there's quite a bit of stuff that I will deliberately leave out. Some because I don't have a solid understanding that the prescience is valid. Okay, so there, I have to deliberately screen certain memes